Stop with that already.
No.
Enough. Stop with that.
No. I'm telling you, I look in your face and I know that you're lying!
Hey guys, you're listening to Metal Matters, a weekly Gimme Radio podcast. I'm your host, Mike Hill. If you like metal, punk, hardcore, or anything extreme, you've come to the right place. So subscribe and never miss out. Today is a band that both you and I have a lot, and mainly you actually, have a lot of connection with this band directly. And Steve Austin, the man behind Today is a Day. And me, more like on a secondary way, I have a lot of connection to the band because I was a huge fan from day one with Today is a Day. And I still respect and appreciate their music to this day. And they've had or Steve, AKA Today's the Day, has had a long career of putting out high quality music. You know, they have a new record out this year, and but the record that we're going to focus on is Willpower, which right. is their second full length record on Amphetamine Reptile. And
yes.
So yeah, I mean I'll just run down some of the basics here. Amphetamine Reptile, or you might hear us refer to it as AmRep, released this record September 1994. It was recorded earlier that same year at White Room Studios, Detroit, Michigan. Engineered by Al Sutton and produced by Steve Austin. The program length of the original release was 29 minutes, 36 seconds. And then there was a remaster that had an additional song, Execution Style, which came out on Steve's label, Supernova Records, in 2007. And the program length for that is 31 minutes, 58 seconds, this reissue. And Execution Style had previously been released on a compilation called Dope Guns and Fucking in the Streets. And that was a AmRep. They would put out, it was a release by AmRep, and they would put out these compilations of awesome bands that some of them were on the label, some of them weren't. And did you ever collect any of those? I have all of them actually.
Oh, you do? That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, back in the day when those were coming out, there's like the 7 inches. I had a few, but I always found them hard to come by. I wasn't really doing a lot of mail order around that time, so I'd go to the record store. If I would see one, I would buy one. So I had a few, but over the years, buying and selling my record collection a few times, like a lot of people, I'm sure. I did not. It's really cool that you have all those. They did release the whole series on a double, or maybe it's a triple LP.
Yeah.
A few years back. So I have that, so I have all the material for sure. But no, I didn't have all the original 7 inches. That's pretty cool to have those.
Yeah, I working at Newbury Comics in the 90s, I was able to get a lot of that stuff. And then just living in Boston and traveling on tour, I was able to locate all those 7 inches just over the years. A lot of them were down in Baltimore. There was Reptile Records, and that dude, Chris X, he had like every possible record you can imagine. Even if it wasn't out in the store, he had it secreted away in some box somewhere. And if you knew exactly what you wanted and you asked for it, he would get it for you. Most likely he had the record. You know what I mean?
I never made it to that store, to Reptilian, but I've heard, the store. That guy was like the direct line to the AmRep catalog for people on the East Coast.
Yeah, totally.
And I think part of the reason I didn't have a lot of those 7 inches is because you and a bunch of my other friends worked at Newbury Comics Warehouse. So before I could ever get to the store, they'd be gone.
That was actually a very common occurrence where there'd be some rare record that would come out. Like, for example, in the 90s, the Melvins had those 7 inches that came out with the Death's Head symbol on it.
Oh, the singles collections, yeah.
Yeah, and then like there would be like 5 that would show up to go out to the stores, and they would all be
Right.
gone. That none of them would make it out to the stores because, like, Aaron Harris or like Clifford would
Right.
buy them, and I would pick one up, and it would all be bought by the employees.
Yeah, I never worked there, but when I was living in Boston, I think I knew like 10 of you guys that at one time or another had worked there. So that's what happened to all those dope guns compilations.
That was an interesting place to work, man, because it was like it was almost impossible to get fired from that job. It was the kind of thing where like you could show up late, people showed up, fucking drunk and shit like that, and it was made for guys in bands because like everyone that worked there was in a band, it seemed like, and they would go on tour, and you had your job when you got back. I mean, of course the pay sucked and everything, but
Right.
you had benefits, which is cool, and
Yeah.
and when you came back, you had your shitty hourly job there, and everyone kind of lived in that part of town, and you could walk to work and all that kind of stuff, and it was kind of like a fun time in the 90s to work there with everybody, and had members of ISIS, you had guys from Cast Iron Hike, you had Sam Blackchurch, there was a dude from Blood for Blood worked there. There was like all these guys in bands, and I'm sure I'm forgetting other bands and other people that did stuff like Rama Mayo, this dude who did a record label called Big Wheel Recreations. He worked there. You'd run into pretty much everyone working at the warehouse. It's kind of a weird job that way.
Yeah. I don't know how I didn't end up working there. I probably should have got a job there. I would have stayed in Boston longer than I did. You said you were a fan from day one with Today's the Day, right? Like Supernova, like that came out. You were aware that was out.
Oh,
you
yeah.
were a fan of that. I came a bit later to the game on them. My introduction to them was Willpower, was this record. Me and the drummer of Cable at the time, we were booking a lot of shows. He was booking a lot more than me, but we both booked shows at a venue out here called Studio 158, Eastern Connecticut. And I would go over to his house, and he would always be getting promos and stuff. And he got this promo in the mail from Amphetamine Reptile, Today's the Day Willpower. And at the time, neither one of us have ever heard of Today's the Day. We had no idea what it was. And that was really like a life-changing moment for me, putting that CD in the CD player, and both of us, our minds are blown. It wasn't like, oh, we've never heard anything like this, but we never heard like those components put together in heavy music. Like it wasn't metal, it wasn't hardcore. And, I guess the easy label to pull on it is noise, especially being on AMREP. That word got thrown around a lot, but to me, it transcends all that stuff. And it was like the first time I heard Souls at Zero by Neurosis. It was just like a life-changing moment for me. Like it made me look at playing heavy music differently. It didn't particularly sound like tuned down or anything like that. It sounded like it might even be in standard tuning. I mean, I actually don't know that for sure. It's a question I should have asked.
I think it is actually an E standard. I'm pretty sure.
I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah.
But I mean, I was just blown away, and that record has stayed with me ever since that day, man. Easily for me, Today's the Day Willpower easily is a top 5 important record in my life. It really made me look at playing music and heavy music in a different way. And I think it had that impact on a lot of people kind of that operated in our world and our scene that we were involved in. And I'm sure if you ask those guys, Dead Guy, for instance, I know those guys were heavily influenced by Today's the Day. And, go right on down the line. They spread quite a web with the Willpower record. I mean, some of those guys are probably into, Supernova before that. But to me, my introduction was Willpower, man. And it was a life-altering record for me, for sure.
Yeah, it's like I'd been a fan of that label for a while. I mean, I think maybe the first band I heard on AMREP was the Cows, and It's funny, like this, I'm getting like kind of emotional thinking about this because this is like a very pivotal point in my life, like getting into this kind of music, because when I first discovered AMREP, it was like, coming out of the late 80s and into the 90s. And I was at a point in my life where I was like, punk rock, hardcore, whatever, forget about it. That's for kids, and there was a lot of cool death metal happening around that time, which I was gravitating towards. And when I started hearing the bands on AMREP, it was like I imagined it to be guys that were maybe, with a similar experience. Like they were into like Black Flag, and they were into, the Circle Jerks, and like the punk rock stuff and the hardcore stuff from the 80s, but didn't want to like hang around with a bunch of kids who were like straight edge and vegan, you know what I mean? And sort of went into like a darker path of like, adulthood and failures and, expectations crushed and things like that. And that's kind of like the whole AMREP vibe is just like this kind of nihilistic, very cynical version of broken dreams. You know what I mean? Like all of the well-wishing of hardcore punk music being brought into the grim realities of like being a young man in the 90s and understanding what it means to be out on your own. And there was like this, the AMREP bands always had this kind of outsider, like wandering, kind of Travis Bickle like vibe to it. And that's exactly where I was in life at that time, man. I was like, in my 20s, just moved to a new town, and a lot of this stuff was like crucial. It really spoke to me. And then Today Is the Day, there was, it was the Clusterfuck compilation, which had Today Is the Day, Choke Bore, and a third band, and I should have written this band down. Oh, Guzzard. Yeah, there you go. See now we're working together here. That was the first time I actually heard Today Is the Day. And then I think the I Bent Scared 7-inch.
Right.
And then, Willpower was the record that really sunk the hooks into me. And, for the reasons I mentioned before. And similar to what you said, there was all these different components that were added together. Like, there was like this extreme noise thing going on. There was like samples and, there was like a blues and like country like thing going on, very subtle, and they just seemed like just like a bunch of weird guys that were playing this like almost unlistenable music, which was at the same time very abrasive, but also at the same time very catchy too.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, you described it pretty well too. Is like kind of like the tail end of same story with me, like the kind of the tail end of like getting out of like traditional hardcore punks for the most part. I still love that stuff. I always will. But it was getting real stale, man. And like to me, the AMREP scene and like Willpower especially, like it's kind of like if you met someone, in your circle and you're like, hey man, do you know this Today Is the Day band or this Willpower record? It was kind of like if they didn't, you were like, oh, what the fuck are you doing, man? Like you need this record, But if you met someone that did, that already knew it, it was like, oh, all right, like you're all right. You're on my level over here. Like I started to stop give a fuck about like stop giving a fuck. Sorry about like Victory Records and Revelation Records and that whole scene just started to get really stale. And like I said, I discovered Neurosis and Melvins and Sleep and that kind of stuff a little bit before. But when I discovered Today Is the Day, man, it was really had elements of that, like Black Flag and the stuff I grew up loving. But it was just, there was something more adult about it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So it was like early on, getting into punk rock, you met someone else that was in the Black Flag. It was like a special thing, I mean, nowadays, it's a totally different world in that aspect. But like back then, it fucking meant something. You see some dude walking down the street with a Black Flag shirt when you're a kid, or 16 or whatever. It meant something, And that's the way I got that feeling again when I got into bands like Today Is the Day and stuff. I was like, oh, all right, that guy gets it,
What was really cool about the AmRep bands is they all the bands had cool shirts. Like they had this merch with the amphetamine reptile logo on the back. And I always thought that was like a super cool logo. And I remember very specific times being out in Boston, because this is like when I lived in Boston. It was like the 90s. And, you know, I'd be out at other shows and I would see someone wearing an AmRep shirt, a band with an AmRep logo on it. And I was like, oh, that the fucking dude probably knows what's up, you know, because he's like into something that I'm into, you know. We're like on the outside of everything, and we're like these cool like loner dudes, you know what I mean? Right. But yeah, I mean, it was different. Now everyone, you know, it's a different story with T-shirts and everything. But
right, yeah, it is, man. It's not as identifiable, you know. I mean, I can't remember the very first time you had a conversation. I'm sure it was at a show in Boston somewhere, and I'm sure, you know, I don't even remember how we got introduced or whatever. It could have been because of a fucking T-shirt one of us was wearing, you know, like, oh shit, you know who the God Bullies are?
Yeah, probably something like that, you know. Well, I mean, I can tell you, happened a lot back then. I can definitely tell you how, like, I knew about Cable before I knew you. You know what I mean? Because Cable, I associated with like this type of music, you know, and I had become friends with Jeff Cackside. Actually, this is really funny. Jeff was referred to me by someone because we were looking for a bass player in this hardcore band I was playing in. And I don't want to talk about that band, but
I know the band.
And Jeff showed up one day, and he ended up living with Aaron Turner and those guys, and we lived down the street from them at the infamous Hydra Head house. That's where all those guys lived. And and then Jeff was introduced to me as a guy who used to play in Cable. And I'm like, oh, cool. Like, you know, I like that band's a good band, and this guy probably gets the kind of stuff I'm trying to do here. And it was around the time that Dead Guy was like a really big band, and you know, that glimmer of time when they were able to draw a lot of people and everything. And Jeff and I just hit it off, and that's how, through him is how you and I actually got to meet, like, you know, all those years ago.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I remember when I moved to Boston, I lived with those guys too, running into you on the street because you lived like right down the hill from where we live.
Yeah.
But I was also aware of you before that, and one of your other bands, Pre-Anodyne, which I don't think you want to talk about, but but I enjoyed it. But yeah, man, it was you know, that day I went over. And me and our drummer discovered that record. It kind of just changed everything. You know, Cable as a band, we were looking to do something different. You know, like that was the point of starting that band. Was we didn't really know what the hell we wanted to do, but we knew we wanted it to be different than a lot of stuff that was going on. I don't know if we ever figured out what the hell we wanted to do, but that was a big influence on us. And then we got to play with Today Is the Day. The Tune-In New Haven, Connecticut, on the Willpower tour. And that was another like transcendent moment. Those guys live were a thing to be seen.
Yeah, especially back then, for sure, man.
Whew. Yeah, it was, I believe the Dead Guy also played that show. There was Cable, Dead Guy, Today Is the Day, and there might have been another couple local bands on there too. But wow, seeing that live was, you know, 3-piece, man, power trio, no bells and whistles, bass, drums, guitar, and it was vicious, and it was real, and it was in your face, and like nobody in that room, and there was probably about 10 people in that room. No one gave a shit back then, even with Dead Guy playing. This was right before they kind of broke, so to say, you know. I mean, they left an impact. You know, you either loved it, you hated it, it didn't matter, it left an impact. Steve, I've never seen a human being sweat as much as Steve Austin when he plays. It's just like, it looked like someone dumped like, you know, 10 gallons of water over his head, like 3 songs into the set. And he was just like, it was so real and so like visceral and intense, man. Like you had no choice but to pay attention to it. So between getting that record, you know, hearing that record and then seeing it shortly after, seeing them live, was very, very impactful on me. As a musician and as a fan of music, and you know, I can't overstate how important that year was, man. Seeing them live for the first time and hearing Willpower.
Yeah, it's funny that it's interesting actually that you mentioned that show. It's like you got Today Is the Day, you got Cable, and you got Dead Guy. And I'm trying to explain this. It's almost like in like acoustics, or sound waves, like there's this destructive interference, or in this case, constructive interference with all three of these different things for a very specific time. All those waves like met and created something. You know what I mean? And because the reality is like Cable was like you guys definitely, and this is not, and I mean this with all due respect, there was like an emo thing that used to be part of what you guys did. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like there's like a screamo, noisy screamo thing that I associated early Cable with, and then there was Dead Guy, who are disciples of Rorschach. They had members from that band were in it. Keith Huckins was in it.
Yes.
And then you had these wild cards from Tennessee. Today Is the Day. Who knows where the fuck what was influencing them? I can't even tell you. It's like, I know like Steve would be like, outlaw country music and like fucking Hank Williams and I'm like, all right, cool, right, yeah, sure. But I don't know what else that guy was into that made him make music like that. But I had really never heard anything remotely, even the guitar tones, everything. It's completely unique. And you can tell it's Steve Austin from the first note of every song. So all these things came together, and there was an explosion of bands that eclipsed the popularity of all three of those bands that have direct influence from all three of those bands. You know what I mean? And Today Is the Day being like a band that still to this day are, they're a well-known band, but they're not like massive the way some of the bands that they influence were. And some of those bands sounded completely different. There was like a before and after effect when Today Is the Day started infiltrating the hardcore scene. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly.
And then those bands were changed completely and became this other thing. And, and they owe a lot to Steve, I think.
I totally agree with that. I mean, I could go on naming bands, but I'm not going to do that. That were hugely influenced by Today Is the Day. That now are like these huge bands. People can figure that out on their own. But I think people might argue there's multiple reasons why Today Is the Day is not as popular as some of those bands. I like to think, knowing Steve personally and having many conversations with him through the years, and I think Today Is the Day is not as popular as those bands because Steve still does exactly what he wants to do, and he does not give a fuck who likes it or what's cool or what's not cool, and he just soldiers on, man. He's not in Tennessee anymore. Now he's in northern Maine, and I think he just does what he does, and he's not so worried about what other people are doing. And I think a lot of people, you know how it is, man. When there's a game you play in this music world. people don't want to admit that, but like a lot of bands that are big bands and popular bands play the game, and Steve's never been good at playing the game. And I think that has a lot to do with why they are where they are now. And they kind of had their moment for a while around In the Eyes of God when that record came out. They were on Relapse, and I'd say that's probably their like height of popularity. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that when they transitioned over to Relapse, which had a broader, like they reached deeper into the metal world than AMREP was. You know what I mean? And I feel like though, that, and the term noise rock didn't even really exist at that time. But for lack of a better term, we'll call it noise rock. Like that scene, that AMREP noise scene, was pretty marginal. You know what I mean? It was like a very insider kind of vibe with those bands. Like there were some bands that got, like Helmet, for example, became massively popular. But a lot of those bands, like, just sort of barely got their heads above water. And they were like, they had their fans. But when today's they moved on to Relapse, that's when like a whole other group of people that would appreciate what they were doing, I think, became hip to that band. Because a lot of people thought that was their first record.
Right, totally, man. So I remember back. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, they didn't even know about the AmRep stuff.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And
I would be yelling at people like, "This isn't their fucking first record. Like, you got to check out their first 3 records. Like, this is cool, but their first 3 records, that's the shit, man. Like, never mind this. Check that out." And they're like, "Oh, what are you talking about?" Like, they thought they were like a new band or something.
I mean, I think I've Been Scared. I think that 7-inch came out in 1989, actually.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. It's kind of, and then, In the Eyes of God was on their second release for Relapse. And like, we both agree that was probably like their pinnacle of popularity. But then you think about it for a minute, what followed up In the Eyes of God was a double album called Sadness Will Prevail that from beginning to end sounds like a fucking nightmare.
Yeah.
It's just, that record is very hard to explain. It's not an easy listen. There's a lot of things going on besides like, 3.5 minute like rock songs. I don't know if Relapse was like ready for that, or I know a lot of their fans certainly weren't. That's a dividing record with a lot of people. A lot of people love it. A lot of people hate it. But it's kind of like what I was saying though. Like, we put out In the Eyes of God. It was, it was pretty metal for them, and I had like kind of a formula, so to say. And then they follow it up with like this insane double album that almost sounds nothing like In the Eyes of God. And I think a lot of people were like, "Well, what the hell is this?"
No, I agree. It doesn't sound anything like it, and I feel like that was like, it left me scratching my head a little bit, I mean, and I'm a fan. Like I've like, followed their progression. Like I said, I got into them like way, the early 90s, you know what I mean? And, they changed because even in the AmRep records, like between Supernova and Willpower, there's like a slight, their sound is different. You know what I mean? It's still, the same vibe, but there's differences in sound. And then the self-titled record has a way different sound. And then In the Eyes of God, that's when they really started changing almost record by record what they sounded like.
Right.
But there was still like this insane thing that kind of connected everything. You can tell there's like this madness behind everything that linked all this stuff together,
Right. Yeah, man. And then, that show I referenced, Today's the Day, Dead Guy, and then the band Cable played. I also got to meet Steve at that show. And, we became great friends and stayed in touch. So years later, down the road, when we were going to make our third album, Steve had relocated from Nashville up to Massachusetts. And he moved his studio and everything, all the operations up to Massachusetts. So I reached out to him, and he engineered what was our Northern Failures album, our second record for Hydra Head. And then, when he was up here, we became, friends. Like, we were hanging out a lot. I would go to see Today's the Day rehearse. So we were really tight for a while. And Steve went on to record two more full lengths for us, and then some songs here and there through other sessions. But so that's how I really got to know him well when he moved up here from Nashville up to New England.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome, man. And there was like points where you possibly might have been asked to play in the band. Is that true?
Yeah, it's true. Yep. Yeah. But for whatever reason, it was a couple different times. It didn't work out either time. We never even jammed or anything like that. I don't know. I don't know why that never happened. It just never happened.
Yeah.
You know? Me and Steve did jam just one time on a project that became known as Taipan, which was a record he put out on his label Supernova. More rock kind of feel. Steve played guitar and sang. So it had that Today's Day elements for sure, but it was way more just like rock and roll type shit. But yeah, I always maintained a great friendship with Steve to this day. You know?
Willpower also features what I consider to be the classic lineup of the band too. You know, Today's Day has always been a 3-piece. There was a point where there's no bass player and a keyboard player, drums and vocals. So on Willpower, we had Steve Austin, vocals, guitar, electronics, you know, samples, that kind of stuff. Brad Elrod on drums and Mike Harrell on bass. And Brad Elrod, at least during this phase of the band, I feel like he contributed equally to the sound of what Today Is a Day. He helped define that sound, I think, with his drumming as well as Steve's crazy guitar playing and over the top like approach to the whole thing.
Yeah, man. There's no way we can talk about any of the records that he's on, especially this record, without, or me anyway, gushing about Brad Elrod's drumming. To me, he's one of the most underrated drummers in heavy music, period. Like, his drumming was so insane. I think it was such a crucial part of those early Today's the Day days. And as you know, we referenced the amphetamine reptile documentary, The Color of Noise, quite a bit. I forgot who said it, but somebody was quoted in that documentary is saying at the time they were the best band. A lot of people thought they were the best band on AMREP, you know, better than the Melvins, better than Helmet, better than whoever, the Cows. And the quote was, in order to be the best band, you have to have the best drummer. And in my eyes, some of those bands you might like better than Today's the Day. None of those bands have a better drummer than Brad Elrod. None of them. I mean, I'm a Melvins fan. I love Dale Crover, you know, John Stanier from Helmet. I get it. Influential guy. Brad Elrod. I'll take Brad Elrod over any of those guys.
I'd have to agree with you, just mainly because I just like Today's the Day better than both of those other bands, and a lot of it is because of the rhythm section and the drumming specifically, and just combining that with just like the insanity of like Steve's guitar playing, his lyrics. You know, I was always very much into his lyrics and stuff too on all those records, and the imagery and just this nightmarish landscape that he ended up portraying in the songs. You know, and a lot of that stuff. Yeah, it was
so much different.
Yeah, it was very so different, man. Very different, you know. And yeah, like I was saying earlier, it's just that period of my life was like a very trying period. You know, it's like the Today's the Day records and the Amphetamine Reptile catalog provided this very specific soundtrack to that, you know, point in my life. And it was, you know, I was going through some like typical shit, you know, when you're like 24 years old or whatever. It's like, you know, first real relationships falling apart and not knowing what to do with your life, you know, that kind of stuff, you know what I mean? And being broke, trying to do a band, trying to like survive, you know, that kind of stuff for the first time. Like your first iteration through all that stuff was happening to me right around the time I was getting into this stuff. And it was, you know, very much a source of, you know, solace for me almost, you know. And, you know, Today's the Day, Neurosis, you know, Integrity was another band that I got into around this time, you know, because similar to Steve, you know, he had all this like Charles Manson sort of, you know, references and everything. And, you know, there was this very dark vibe to the band, which was something that I was very much into, and also was one of the reasons why I was really not into hardcore around that time, because I just wasn't into the positive sort of stuff and veganism and being straight edge and all that stuff. Just, it was not even part of the conversation I was having inside my head, man. It was so completely not relatable to my mindset at that time. And that's why I fell into bands like this, you know?
Yeah, you literally just told my exact story of my life from that and that age range. Like literally, man, like word for word. That's how I would put it. What this stuff, discovering this stuff, meant to me too back then. Because, and I used to, in my own head, I had like the Holy Trinity. 3 bands to me were Neurosis, Today Is the Day, Integrity. You know, and then there was other bands on the fringe of that. I loved Dead Guy. I loved Buzz Oven was another one I loved.
Oh yeah.
Craw, you know, some bands people probably never even fucking heard of. But that was like my whole Holy Trinity, man. It was Neurosis, Today Is the Day, and Integrity. You know, that was what formed like my real opinion on what I wanted to do musically. I'm like, I'm gonna take all those 3 bands and push them together and create my own shit out of that. And yeah, I was fucking broke, dude. You know, bouncing like shitty relationships, ending, and you know. It was literally, that's my story and yours seem very, very similar around that time.
Yeah, totally, man. I just remember, I don't know why this popped into my head just now, but I remember getting a paycheck for $210 like a week. And I was like, how am I going to make this happen, man? Like, how am I going to live on $210 a week? You know, I don't think I was actually making only that, but it was like, I think I had just come back from tour or something, and I worked a few days, and I'm like, man, how the fuck am I going to survive, man? And just all this stuff really helped get through periods like that, you know? And it sounds corny, but it's true, you know?
No, it's true, man. It's fucking true. It's absolutely true, man. Music is a powerful thing. It is. You know, there's people I've met in my life who like don't listen to music or don't give a fuck. I don't understand that to me. If you take the music away from me, man, there's nothing left, dude.
Yeah.
You know?
I'm in the same boat, man, for sure. You know?
It's crucial. So I get it, man. It sounds cliche to say that, man. Like the music got me through it, but it did. It did for me too, man. Like I'm not afraid to say it either, man. Shit meant everything to me back then.
Let's run down the track listing for the record too. So the original version of the record was side A. Opens up with Willpower, My First Knife, Nothing to Lose, and ends with Golden Calf. Side B kicks off with Sidewinder, Many Happy Returns, Simple Touch, Promised Land, and I don't think this is actually credited, but there's Amazing Grace, like this instrumental thing at the end. And the reissue, they tag on Execution Style, which is like one of my favorite song titles ever.
Yeah, fucking so good. It's like for the life of me, the record is only, 29:36 was the original running time. They tacked that on, and then it was just over 30 minutes. And for the life of me, I could never figure out why they just didn't include it in the record. Because it's such a great song too. But, regardless, it ended up on the reissue. So like a month ago, one of the last times I got to see live music, probably in my life.
No, don't say that, man.
So currently going through this insane virus bullshit right now. I got to see Today Is the Day on what was the first date of their tour for the No Good to Anyone album that had just come out. I believe it came out that day or was coming out the day after. So I got to sit down with Steve and actually ask him some questions about some of this Willpower shit we're talking about.
That's awesome.
Yeah, like you had referenced the Amazing Grace little instrumental piece that comes on. That was an ode to his father. And I didn't even know for years whether or not that was actually someone in the band playing that, or it was just some weird sample or field recording of like Amazing Grace being played or something. But Steve did play that in the studio. It was like a tribute for his father had passed away the week before they went to Michigan to record the record. Which I never knew, but not to sound like one of those guys, but like I can almost hear that something in that record, some kind of like deep shit in that record. From day one, when I first heard it, I felt like there was more going on here than just music, and talking to Steve about that, like not knowing his father had passed away right before that makes me look at it a little bit differently now and be like, maybe like some of that stuff from that record I was feeling back then. Like, you know, obviously he was feeling when he made the record, which I thought was interesting. And I've always been interested in the cover art.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, just like this fucked up looking face, close up of like a face, like eyes and nose, and it looks like someone like turned to stone or something. So I had asked Steve about that, and he said he was flipping through an issue of a Hustler magazine. Your favorite magazine.
Hustler,
you know?
Yeah, man.
Yeah. And it was like some article. It was I believe it was around the time, an issue from around the time of like the whole like crazy Larry Flint censorship stuff, you know.
Uh-huh.
And there was some article in there about like the rise in domestic abuse and child abuse in the United States. And there was just some picture, and he cut it out of that article of Hustler magazine. And he would just cut stuff out, pictures of magazines, and kind of store them away, like anticipating like future layouts or whatever, you know. So he had that, and he had a piece of wrapping paper that was like kind of a granite looking theme on the wrapping paper. So he took that stuff, he sent it to Tom Hazelmeyer, the brains behind Amphetamine Reptile Records, an amazing artist in his own right.
Yep.
So he merged this like picture that Steve cut out of Hustler magazine with this wrapping paper, and that's how they created the cover of Willpower, like with that discoloration of the face and everything. That's how that was created. But I thought it was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that album cover is very haunting because it's like the face. It's like this child face, and it's just so creepy looking, you know.
Yeah, it was the thing with them, man. It was like on every turn, like, all right, I get the CD in front of me, right? You know, the cover's like so creepy and fucked up, and then you open it up, and like the inside panel is a picture of an American flag, but it's very worn and tattered, you know. But it's just an American flag. You're like, oh, okay. And then like the disc face is like these stars and moons with like this blue kind of slate granite color. And the story behind the disc art is when they did their first European tour, they ate at some restaurant, and they had all these, I guess they served the food on paper plates, and they had all these crazy like paper plates with like designs and like spiritual sayings and stuff on them. So they took a bunch of those plates home from tour, and the disc print art is from one of those paper plates. Once again, Steve cut it up, sent it to Tom Hazelmeyer, and that's how they got the disc print.
Wow.
And the American flag was a sticker Steve had put on the back of his first guitar when Today's the Day started. And it wasn't all tattered like that, you know, it was just an American flag sticker. And then through the years of, you know, wear and tear and touring and shit, it just got all weathered, and Steve just snapped a picture of it. So all these like elements that make this record like so weird and fucked up are like just come from a very simple place, but you know, you don't have any idea.
I love that, man. It's like so personal too, you know, because it's all actual things that were gathered out in just living life, you know.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting because, you know, I've been staring at this record for fucking a long time. I never really. It was cool to get some insight on where these things came from.
That's cool, man. You really got a chance to sit with Steve, man, and get this stuff, you know.
Yeah, it was cool. It was definitely a cool experience. He was very open, you know. He was very willing and open about anything I asked him to do with the record, which was cool. I also had a chance to ask him about some of the songs, well, specifically the song "Simple Touch," which is vastly different from the songs that precede it on the record. It's like from the opening, you know, the opening seconds of that record, you're getting pummeled over the head with like insane, like heavy rock. And then like Simple Touch starts towards the end of the record, and it's just like this beautiful piece of music. It like totally shifts gears. And I don't know, you know, how well you remember that song, but there's that like guitar solo that comes in, and it just sounds like, I don't even know how to put it into words. It's just very epic sounding, you know? So I was always intrigued with that song. And it's funny how like some of these things are just very simple. Like that song was about a relationship Steve was in at the time, which according to him was not a very good one. you know. And I guess, one day him and his girl at the time had just like this like magical day where like everything was like perfect, in the midst of like this chaotic relationship. So he was inspired to write a song about it that day, about like how, just one day everything can be so like dark and brutal, and then this beautiful thing happens, and then it just goes away again. So it was cool to get some insight on that song in particular, because that's one of my favorite songs on the record for sure.
It's funny you mentioned that one too, because I just love the melancholy nature of that song too. I didn't know there was that much of a backstory with it.
Yeah, and if you've ever had any conversations with Steve is a talker, so there's a lot of information I was getting. So I just pick out simplifying things, but to hear Steve tell these stories, it's way more interesting.
Well, and I hope this happens, but I mean, there's been a lot of stuff that's happened recently with guests, and I know Steve not as well as you do, obviously not as well as you, but I know Steve from over the years too. And,
Sure.
I hit him up about being a guest, and he was all for it,
Right.
And I know that he's supposed to be on tour right now. So I understand if I were on tour and I had to come home and be, sidelined like this, I would be really in a bad, mood. I wouldn't be stoked at all to talk to anybody. Right. But I'm hoping that eventually I'll get Steve on this and we can talk, and maybe the three of us can talk. I think that'd be sick. Maybe we could do this either through technology, or maybe they'll reschedule those dates. And when, maybe those tour dates will come to New York or New Jersey or Philly, and we can all hang out or something like that. I think that'd be cool.
Yeah, that'd be great, man. Steve would be an excellent guest, man. He always answers the questions, and he takes it beyond that, and you get answers to stuff you may have not even asked that are like, wow, cool.
Yeah, no, that's
they'll
great.
They'll be back out there. They'll be the first band back out there to one.
Yeah. No, I like Steve. I mean, I don't know him as well as you do, but he shows up every now and then, and we talk and we hang out, and it's cool. Like, I'm more of like a once removed person from his circle of people. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, I think I met Steve back in the Hydra Head days when, everyone lived in New England, and, Turner and Jeff and those guys, at the Middle East upstairs or some shit. We all met there, and,
Right.
That was how but I was always like a third guy, I was like once removed from his actual people,
Sure. Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
But, you have any favorite tracks besides the entire album?
Well, I know, I feel like in the past, at least a few times, that was my answer. So this is the album I should have waited. I should have held on to that answer and waited,
Mm-hmm.
But yes, the whole album to me is perfect. To me, it's one song. But if I were to pick the song Sidewinder, there's the middle of that song. It just descends into this chaotic series of like accents and breaks and starts and stops, which to this day, if I tried it in my head, like, imagine playing along to it, and like, how the fuck could anyone even do that? It like goes on for like a minute.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but you're like, oh, it's good. It's going to change here. And then, nope, it does another accent, and then another one, and then another, like, that song just always blew my mind, still does. And then my favorite song is Simple Touch, like we were just talking about. Just because it's such like a dark horse song, and it's this melancholy, man. It's beautiful, but it's like terrifying at the same time. And like Steve's vocals in that song are so haunting. That was another thing, man, about listening to them. He would just, at the drop of a hat, go into this like beautiful singing voice.
Steve's use of falsetto is like remarkable, and that's not a singing technique that a lot of men in extreme music are comfortable trying to pull off, and he just dives right in, and he does a great job.
Yeah, it goes from the most vicious thing ever to like the most beautiful thing ever, and it's seamless. You know, it's like that. So that song always blew my mind, man. That was definitely a favorite of mine. Simple Touch. How about you?
I would say Willpower and My First Knife, the first two tracks, and
Yeah.
Simple Touch as well. That's a song that like I said, that was a difficult time for me as well, and I remember that song being very much part of my my solace of spirit, for lack of a better term, Yeah, just like one of those songs where you're feeling sorry for yourself. You're sitting alone in your room. There's like no one around. There's no one to talk to on the phone. There's no chicks around. There's no nothing, man. And like, this is the record I'd put on, and that song particularly would really grab me, and it wouldn't put me in a better mood, but it would help kind of like ease the feelings at that point, and just the mindset, man, I was in, reading books about serial killers and Charles Manson and Satan and the, processed church and Church of Satan and all this stuff, and listening to Today Is a Day, and that kind of stuff was very, it was just like a very dark, negative space for me. And, this record was something to help get me through all that,
Yeah, man, absolutely. And the opening track, like you said, Willpower, has the classic Goodfellas sample, which, knowing you as long as I've known you, we both have a love for those Scorsese gangster movies. But knowing you as long as I have, I feel like there's been a time, or maybe two times in your life, where a woman may have said something similar to "I look in your face and know that you're lying" to you.
Probably.
I'm gonna guess that. I'm not calling you a liar. I'm just saying I could see a scenario like that playing out.
Well, it probably says more about them than it says about me, really.
Well, yeah, you could spin it however you want to. It's cool.
That's how I'm going to play it,
A couple more quick things about some of the tracks.
Yeah, man.
The samples are a big part of that record.
Yeah.
So everyone knows by now the Willpower sample is from Goodfellas. Steve was telling me at the time they used that. He didn't feel like, Goodfellas was a popular movie, but not like it's like everyone knows Goodfellas now. He's like, I felt when we used that back then, like not many people even knew what Goodfellas was. And then it like kind of fucking exploded after that. Mm-hmm. Still, like, so fitting for that song. The way that song opens with the bass and then the pick slides and noise, and it's just fucking perfect, man. It just punches you in the face right out of the box. It makes you pay attention. But then the samples on the song Golden Calf, those were from a Macintosh commercial.
Wow.
That was written by Oliver Stone.
How the fuck did he know that? Like, how is that something that anyone would know is the thing that kills me?
I don't know, man. It was like 93, 94, kind of around there. So that's where the you are the universe, like that whole you're the thumbs in the eyes, like that whole thing was a Macintosh commercial. I don't know who's doing the voice in the commercial, and Steve didn't know either, but I guess it was written by Oliver Stone.
Wow.
And then the song Promised Land, that has the whole Judy, we're ready for you now, like that whole thing. That's from, I didn't know this, most people probably do, that's from Rebel Without a Cause.
Yeah, I didn't know that. And I've only seen that film maybe 2 or 3 times in my lifetime. So, yeah, I didn't know that off the top of my head.
Yeah, I didn't either. So, but the use of samples, man, are like so fucking, they're like really part of the song. The use of samples on that record's incredible, I think.
Also, I think the thing that got me originally was just the fucking title too, man. Willpower. It was like,
yeah.
I don't know, man. Like I said, I'm going to this again. Like that period of time for me required a tremendous amount of willpower to get through, and it just was the right thing for me at the right time in my life. And it's like this that it's right there written in the fucking title, Willpower. And it's so fucking heavy, man, just intense.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely, I couldn't agree more.
So yeah, man, that's Willpower by Today Is the Day.
Yeah, man. One quick thing for people, like we do a lot of these, man, and we talk about records that are unfortunately out of print or hard to find and stuff like that. Today Is the Day is signed to BMG/The End Records, and Steve told me they're going through the whole catalog, release by release over the years. They're doing reissues for everything, and the next one he told me is going to be Willpower.
Oh, fuck so yeah, man.
Yeah, there'll be a new version of Willpower, CD, vinyl, and all that readily available out there, because I don't think right now you're going to find many copies of Willpower floating around. But
and if you guys out there want a copy, just email Randy, and he'll dub a cassette version of it for you that you can listen to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
A cassette version of it.
I have a cassette player. Yeah. You have to mail me a blank tape, a self-addressed, stamped, padded envelope.
You fucking cheap bastard, man. You wouldn't just eat the cost of a cassette tape for one of our listeners? Come on, man.
No, I just say go to fucking YouTube like everyone else does. Yeah, man. Willpower, dude. I can't say enough about Willpower. If anyone has never heard Willpower, you can't really get off your couch now. But when you can get off your couch and go outside, go get Willpower.
Yeah, hopefully when this thing airs, we might be seeing the end of this thing, man. But you never know. So
you never know. Every day is an adventure right now.
That's it for this week's episode of Metal Matters, a Gimme Radio weekly podcast. Tune in next week and see what we have in store for you. The show is available on all streaming platforms, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, etc. Also, be sure to check out Gimme Radio, streaming on the web, iOS, or Android, for one of the best metal communities, exclusive merch, interviews with artists, and so much more. I'll catch you guys next week. Take care.